let's try and at least place the implications for you. Bring in now Oscar van Heerden, who's a senior research fellow at the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership with the University of Johannesburg, and joins us now via our video link. Great to have you on the program, sir. Thanks as always for making time for the SABC News channel. I think many people, it's safe to say, watched and listened in absolute shock on Saturday. First, when the news broke that Nicolás Maduro has been captured, and then when Donald Trump had that extraordinary press briefing where he announced that the US has effectively taken over a sovereign country. That notwithstanding, I still sit here feeling that not much can be done about it. I mean, who would hold the mighty US accountable at this stage?
Absolutely, Ayanda. I mean, it is quite a shock and horror, as the saying goes, that, this action by the United States, by Donald Trump's administration, has given credence to, for example, President Putin's invasion into Ukraine. We shouldn't be surprised if China is going to do exactly the same thing with regards to Taiwan. The rules-based international order is out the window. International law is out the window. Donald Trump is sending a clear message that might is right, and that he can do whatever he wants. I think the Europeans should be very worried about his threats about Greenland. And I do think we must take Marco Rubio serious when he talks about possibly Cuba being next. And let us also not forget, Ayanda, that same administration has South Africa in their sights, coming up with false narratives, just like this false narrative about narcotics and drugs, the false narrative about mass killings of Christians in northwestern Nigeria, and of course here at home, the false narrative around white genocide. So I think we should be very, very wary about the Donald Trump administration at this point in time.
This creates a bit of an existential crisis, right? If rules don't matter, very little will survive. And I suppose many people will be quite skeptical about this UN Security Council meeting scheduled for later today and its ability to move the needle at all, given the fact that, let's face it, Donald Trump doesn't seem to follow many rules, at least as he decides.
Well, for a start, we should see whether Donald Trump's going to allow people to even coming to America to attend that Security Council meeting. As you know, they have in the past with the UNGA, the UN General Assembly in September last year, simply just decided that the Iranians, the Palestinians and others will not be allowed to come to the United Nations. So, it's just the international rules-based order is no law, is no more. And this is a fact. I think the question we should be asking is where to from here internationally. The South African government, of course, followed the prescript. Let's call for an emergency UN Security Council meeting. Russia and China and everyone else is going to condemn in the strongest terms. But as you say, Ayanda, absolutely nothing is going to come of it. And may I also just add, the UN has demonstrated unequivocally how toothless they are with an ongoing genocide taking place in Gaza, in Palestine, cannot do anything to stop it. UN aid workers being massacred and murdered by the Israeli war criminal, Netanyahu's government, the UN can't do anything. Humanitarian aid is standing ready to assist the Palestinians in Gaza. The UN can't do anything. And in this case with Venezuela, the UN yet again is going to be able to do nothing.
Yeah, and to be clear, Oscar, is it the UN not being able to do anything or the UN refusing to do anything? In other words, are there mechanisms that exist for stronger action outside of what we've seen so far?
We talk about the UN Charter, it mustn't be violated. The truth of the matter is UN member states like Japan, like Germany, and many others, including South Africa, if they really wanted to, they can put together an international UN force. They can send those troops to Venezuela to guard the borders and so forth and protect the Venezuelan government, to assist and so on and so forth. There's so many mechanisms that can be done. But unfortunately, we see, besides condemnation from European leaders, nothing to hold Donald Trump accountable. The South Africans, Africa, bombing in Nigeria, who knows, we might be next. So really, we are finding ourselves in a moment in history where it is chaotic. You know, the realist in the discipline of international relations, has a predominant theory which says the world is chaotic and there is no global power that can govern that chaos except nation states. And Trump has now shown us that that theory holds true. If you have the biggest stick, you are in control, it's survival of the fittest. And in this chaotic world, if no one is going to hold Trump accountable, physically, militarily, politically, then it means he can do whatever he wants.
Can anybody hold the US accountable? I think is still the question that's largely unanswered.
No, absolutely. I mean, people like China, Russia, I would have thought by now, and perhaps it might happen in the coming days, that they would deploy some of their naval vessels to that part of Latin America just to give Donald Trump a moment of pause in case they want to actually do what Marco Rubio indicated, which is to target Colombia next, to target Cuba next, and so forth, in order to have a standoff by naval vessels from Russia and China. Because remember, these are also allies of the global south, of China and Russia and so forth. It's about oil and money ultimately. And so we will have to see how exactly China and Russia is going to play out, because those are the only two great powers that can potentially give Donald Trump a moment of pause.
Of course, what has happened, as you've mentioned multiple times, has sent international law into a state of flux. We actually don't even know if it's worth, at the risk of sounding quite extreme, if it's worth the paper it's written on. If, the president of the United States can wake up one day and decide to capture the president of a sovereign country, what does international law actually mean? So that's the one issue on the one hand. The other is, what happens next for Venezuela? They've got a deputy president. She is backed by the country's constitution to actually act as the president if anything were to happen to the incumbent. And I understand that, in fact, she's going to be sworn in later today. But again, to what end?
And, the truth of the matter is, let's be clear, Ayanda, it was not the might of the United States that went in and snatched Maduro. There were forces inside Venezuela in the military and the political class that were complicit, that worked with America, with the CIA. We believe that some of them had been paid by the CIA to betray Maduro in terms of where exactly he was, which safe house he was in, the little resistance that they had coming in with attack helicopters, Delta Force, suggests that some elements of the military was complicit in this act. So I think the vice president has got her task cut out for her. I don't know whether she had been complicit to this conspiracy, but I think the Venezuelan people must be careful to celebrate too quickly. We've seen in many instances where the United States has deposed leaders. We only have to look at Libya under the Obama administration. Everyone celebrated the killing, the murder of Muammar Gaddafi, and that country today is lying in ruins. Modern day slavery taking place in Libya, complete chaos, a failed state for all intents and purposes. So I think the Venezuelans must be very careful to be too quick to celebrate the fall of Maduro, and rather begin to do some serious introspection as to whether they want to sell their sovereignty down the river and so on.
Yeah, speaking of being careful, how should Pretoria handle this? And I ask the question knowing that there is a statement that is quite unequivocal, quite frankly, coming out to condemn what's happened. But as you've also mentioned earlier on, we know that South Africa is in the US's crosshairs. There have been multiple instances where, frankly, narratives have been allowed, to run into overdrive with very little consequence. Given the fact that how the US feels about a particular country can have a material bearing on the people of that nation. How should Pretoria handle this moment?
Look, as I've been saying many a times over, with the income of Trump coming into office, South Africa needs to be proactive. This is not a moment to be reactive. We must stop thinking that we are exceptional. Trump can do anything. He's a madman. He doesn't adhere to international law. No one thought that he would bomb Nigeria. We all thought it was just a joke, and yet he did. And again, Maduro and others in the Venezuelan government never, in their wildest imagination, thought that Trump would have a 1980s style invasion and snatching of the sitting head of state. So I don't think Pretoria must make light of this matter. We know that the Marco Rubio State Department, we know that Trump himself, all premised on lies and false narratives. In this case with Venezuela about narcotics and drugs, we know that there's false narratives around the white genocide in South Africa and so on. So I really think that South Africa needs to take this very serious because let's be clear, Ayanda, without wanting to sound alarmist, we have had views from the military top brass in South Africa in recent months voicing disappointment in the government, questioning budget cuts and so forth, making very political statements. Then we need to be clear that we don't know whether those people are disaffected, whether they are not in agreement with the commander-in-chief and so forth. We know, for example, that there are political types within the ANC that wants to see the president's back. It was touch and go at the National General Council. Again, I don't want to sound alarmist, but the situation, according to the Americans, is ripe to cause further division within the country, further division within our military and our political class, in order to get their objective. We will have to see. I just don't think that we must take light, or we must not take this moment serious. As South Africa, we need to think very deep and very strategically about how do we deal with such a mad person in the Oval Office.
Feels like we're oscillating from one unprecedented moment to the other, and it's only the 5th of January. Dr. Oscar van Heerden, thanks for your insight. All the best to all of us. Dr. van Heerden is a senior research fellow at the Center for African Diplomacy at the University of Johannesburg. All right, we'll keep a very close eye on this particular story. Of course, if you've just joined us, the big developments to look out for today is that Nicolás Maduro and his wife are expected in a New York court to face those charges of narco-terrorism and others. Plus, the Security Council is going to hold an emergency meeting to try chart a way forward. We'll keep a very close eye on those developments for you.